So, welcome to tonight's discussion led by Brian Lance, a regular contributor to LaRouche PAC as an author. People can you can go to our website and look under authors and find all the articles that Brian has written. It's Saturday, December 4th, 2021, a very interesting period in world history because we're the ones that are going to be making history. And I think this is part of a series of three, I believe, correct, Brian? Okay,
Correct,
so this is
correct.
the first. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. You're getting Brian's first presentation, as I said, out of three. And you can view some of our previous Saturday discussions online at larouchepac.com. So I know Brian has a lot to cover on a very interesting human being in world history named Lyndon LaRouche, who he and I are very familiar with and have had the honor and privilege of working with for, I guess, cumulatively together we're 40 or 50, 60 years, something like that. So a lot of experience, and really, I hope people take from this what a human individual can do on the stage of history, because I believe we're all on that stage of history at this point, and people understand that this is like no other time, and we should take full advantage of it and have fun, as Mr. LaRouche has said consistently before. So let me just hand it over to Brian, and we'll start with the fun.
All right. Good evening to everyone. So, Lyndon LaRouche, yes. Um, I began working with him in 1973, actually following him back several years earlier as an economics student. And, um, and we'll just unfold uh, his economics in particular. Economics is a science. The first slide is a photograph of Lyndon LaRouche uh, as he looked just before going to Burma as a soldier in the U.S. Army. Uh, and the one slide before that, I think. Well, back further. There we go. Thanks, Mila. So this is in 1944. So we're talking about a young man. I think that's important. Many of you know Lyndon LaRouche. You've read some of his works. You're attracted to him because of LaRouche PAC's economic program of infrastructure, large-scale projects, nuclear energy development and fusion. We're cutting against the grain of the current Biden collective, that's for certain. And many people have the sense that economics is not being addressed as it needs to be, given the crisis in the country. And of course, we'll be talking about that some. But Lyndon LaRouche coming back to the East Coast, essentially settling in the New York area. He was raised in New England, in Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. Was startled by the presentation of the ideas of Norbert Wiener. And you can take that slide down. And took it upon himself to launch an effort to debunk Norbert Wiener and the whole concept of cybernetics. Here's an early copy of the book, Cybernetics. And I'll just point out the title of it, so maybe that'll make it more clear why this well-educated young man, Lyndon LaRouche, self-educated largely, took this upon himself. Here he was in his 20s. The full title of the book is Cybernetics for Control and Communication in the Animal and the Machine. The that gives you some sense of perhaps his mentality of Norbert Wiener. Born in Russia, raised in the United States. He had his PhD by the time he was 18 years old. And then his father and family took him to study under Bertrand Russell in England, just by way of background. So what was this about? What was this about? Lynn's economics, or approach to economics, is to turn the American system, to make the American system, in terms of a school of thought, a science. That is his intention. That's why we're here discussing this today. We can reference, and we should, and we've been on our website, in many presentations and in papers, most recently Bob Ingram's series, we've been developing the history of the American system, the American School of Economics, if you will. Alexander Hamilton, Abraham Lincoln, Friedrich List, the Careys, policies also adopted by Franklin Roosevelt with the Reconstruction Finance Corporation was an adaptation. Kennedy's, President John F. Kennedy's moonshot was a reassertion of a Duragist concept in terms of government. The government had a role to play in promoting the general welfare, ensuring our posterity a future, and so a good future. And so, this is the intention. Now, Lynn's, what Mr. LaRouche proposed is summed up. It's available to you. Many of you already have it on the LaRouche PAC website. It's the full title is "The 4 New Laws to Save the USA Now." Not an option, an immediate necessity. And he released this in June of 2014, not that long ago. And that's a summation of the policies and steps taken now. But who was Lyndon LaRouche? If you could put up the next slide, just as a way of referencing this, Lyndon LaRouche became, a key influence on his own, by his own initiation. And so let's go to just a statement of his, and we're going to counterpose that to Norbert Wiener, not some unknown figure, as you'll find out. So here's Lyndon LaRouche. How can we be certain that we know anything in any field? In the final analysis, there is but one fundamental premise of certainty in any branch of human knowledge. That proof is that the ordering of our powers of judgment for practice is in correspondence with the successful improvement of man's powers over nature, to the effect of enculturating man to produce a more numerous population in which each average individual expresses an increased potential power over nature by the same self-reflexive criteria. The next slide. If we can discover that ordering of the creative processes of mind, predictability leads as a method to repeated advances in productive technology. Then that discovered ordering of creative processes is in the world line of perfectible agreement with the laws of the universe. If economic science can pose the problem in those terms of reference, then the characteristics of the universe, as they were reflected in the knowledge of economic science, reflect the characteristics of the kind of relativistic physical space in which we exist. Indeed, there is no other approach but such a form of economic science that can settle this matter. And he goes on to state that doing so, economics can become the king and queen of the sciences. Now let's turn to Norbert Wiener. The next slide. Just so you understand it, when his book came out in 1948, a New York Times review titled it or stated of it that its ultimate importance would be compared to Galileo or Malthus or Rousseau or Mill, James Stuart Mill. That at the time of the book's original release. This was released by MIT. So here is Norbert Wiener's worldview. As entropy increases, the universe and all closed systems in the universe tend naturally to deteriorate and lose their distinctiveness, to move from the least to the more probable state, from the state of organization and differentiation in which distinctions and forms exist, to a state of chaos and sameness. But while the universe as a whole tends to run down, there are local enclaves of whose direction seems opposed to that of the universe at large, and in which there is a limited and temporary tendency for organization to increase. Life finds its home in these enclaves. And he continues, life is an island here and now in a dying world. And he continues further, in a very real sense, we are shipwrecked passengers on a doomed planet. We shall go down, but let it be in a manner in which we may look forward as worthy of our dignity. Now, those are two concepts. You can take that down, I think. Two concepts of the universe, as well as man's role in it. LaRouche is putting forward an idea of, as I stated there, or to summarize there, negentropy, or negative entropy. That is development that the very quality of the human mind, the existence of human cognition, the willful development of those cognitive powers in each and every individual is itself proof that the universe as it's in its totality is in a process of such development, and that man is participating in that process of development. You can take that back to the injunction of Genesis, or to Plato's Timaeus, the idea of hylozoic monism. But the idea here, as Lynn develops it much further, is in terms of a process of negentropic development, is the organizing principle of economies. On the other hand, Norbert Wiener, as you can see, is arguing quite the opposite. He's arguing that we can only, at best, create small enclaves, essentially sandbagging our position and holding on as long as possible before ultimately being doomed. I mean, here you have, I think, really the influence of Bertrand Russell. LaRouche called Bertrand Russell the most evil man of the 20th century. Go on to the next slide. LaRouche was not coming at this, did not stop at some kind of challenge to Norbert Wiener. As many of you know, Lyndon LaRouche went on to be a collaborator with the Reagan administration in what became known as the Strategic Defense Initiative. He was really the author of the Strategic Defense Initiative concept of using advanced science, relativistic physics, space-based laser systems, for example. But as presented by President Reagan, we were offering this as a policy of mutually assured survival for both the Soviet Union at that time and the United States. But this was LaRouche's role in this was absolutely singular. As an economic forecaster, based on his understanding of what was actually required in terms of the process of economic development, the underpinnings of economic stability and growth, LaRouche made a series of forecasts beginning in 1956-57 of what became the 1957 recession, major recession at that time, very dramatic, which no one else called. He went on to, he at the same time developed a long-range forecast based on what he developed as the LaRouche-Riemann method, that projected a stagnation in the actual in capital investment, capital formation in the United States over the course of the 1960s. Therefore, stagnant a labor situation, no growth in the productive workforce, and as a consequence, growing ferment among minorities, student layers, and others who essentially were being marginalized, moved out of the productive process. This was the process, this was the policies under the Federal Reserve of Arthur Burns and company in that period. So he made that projection, which absolutely came true, and then went on to a series of forecasts, the October 1987 crash, which he called several months earlier because of very specific circumstances. Then in the 1997 series of crises that you may be aware of, the collapse of the Asian tigers, the collapse of the long-term capital management derivatives operation, which almost brought down the entire global financial system at that time. The related bankruptcy of Russia's GKO bond, and then of course the 2000 crisis in the dot-com sector, and then his projection that of 2007, 2008 that the crash was on. So in 2007, so in the middle of 2007. So LaRouche's forecasting is incomparable to any other economist, and this was a direct outgrowth of really an outgrowth of the challenge that he took up to rebuke the ideas, not just the individual, that's secondary, but the concept of cybernetics, otherwise known as automation, which of course is a very general term, information theory, systems analysis, and we'll talk about that a little bit right now. At the core of this, in terms of the universe, to say very briefly, Norbert Wiener, among others, was operating on the basis of the standard concept presented, not proven at all, simply an assertion called the second law of thermodynamics. That just like gas in a container, over time, that gas will tend to cease vibration, cease activity, and reach some point of equilibrium, that the universe itself is running down. This is the this is the extension of the idea that your car at a certain point can't be maintained any further. That metal rusts, that people pass on, and so on and so forth. And simply to extrapolate to the idea that this means the universe is running down. There's no proof of this whatsoever. But nonetheless, this is the so-called second law of thermodynamics. And today we have this expressed in the form of radical environmentalism and all the rest, this idea that there is no life worth being lived, doesn't make any difference. We're all going to die anyway, and so on and so forth. As an existential outlook in which the idea, the individual, is disconnected from his actual social nature and his actual positive role, loving capacity for love and capacity for creation, which is what makes him or her human. So Wiener is perceiving, this idea of increasing chaos, of a doomed planet, of a doomed universe, and so on. There's no science to this. Okay, so let's move on to what does this then have to do with systems analysis, information theory, cybernetics, and as he put it in his book, the control and communication in the animal and the machine. Very briefly, let's just emphasize this is an oligarchical outlook. If you could move on to the next slide. Miwa, thank you very much. Norbert Wiener got his start really, or I should say became a major figure as in the promotion of this book during World War II. And this was the idea of servo control of anti-aircraft weapons. He was at MIT at the time and remained there for many years. The whole idea being that, you know, a plane moving very fast at a distance that could not only one way or the other across the vision of the viewer, but also either moving away or moving towards. The ability of anti-aircraft weaponry to target that fast-moving vehicle was simply something that could not be done by human calculation, could not be done quick enough, fast enough. And so even with the advantages of radar. So servo control refers to this idea that, of course, utilizing radar to locate the plane, the bomber or fighter jet or fighter prop plane or whatever at the time. That information was fed into a central processing center for integration. That information, along with other optical devices that to combine with radar could determine the, and then the material integrated, could determine the flight path within a range going forward and at the speed at which it was going. And therefore, anti-aircraft weapons could be targeted in advance or in front of that plane within an increasingly narrow band, given the margin of error could be reduced, minimized through a calculus of variations to more effectively target those aircraft. So you have simply, information gathered, processed, integrated, projecting the flight, and of course the plane only has a certain margin of possibilities. If it turns too quickly, the plane could disintegrate or the pilot pass out. There's only a certain range of opportunities. So your calculations, your integration are taking into account that range of possibilities of that plane as well. And then, of course, this process continues. It's not one momentary process. It's a continuing process in which the information is fed back. The plane may not be have been hit. The plane may have changed course. New information is gathered. That's fed back, integrated with the prior information to again attempt to make a projection of the pathway of the plane. And for Wiener, the importance of this is the importance of integration in this process, of information rather, the integration of information. The fundamental notion of message, whether it should be communicated by electrical, mechanical, or nervous means. That in this process of feedback, we have a way of modeling, he would say, other similar processes in animals as well as machines. All right, you can take that down. The key here, what's missing in this? Cognition. This entire process automated, targets, and allows the more effective shooting down of enemy aircraft. Applied more generally, the idea is through such a linearized or set of linearized functions, systems of linearized functions. Well, isn't this what the human mind does? This is Norbert Wiener's argument. Can we not substitute this decision-making process for human beings? And this was the original concept, and still in many ways the concept at the heart of artificial intelligence. That all we're talking about, all we're dealing with in terms of the process of decision-making, what we have for dinner, what we're going to decide as a career, so on and so forth, is simply a matter of processing information. Now, I mentioned that this is an oligarchical outlook, and I want to emphasize this. It's as old as Adam Smith, and von Hayek, von Mises. If you are familiar with it, Adam Smith's writings on moral sentiments, the fact that all decisions regarding the future, a fundamental future of mankind, must be left to God. Our capabilities are simply to follow our animal instincts, seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. Yeah, this is the Wiener information theory concept is an extension of that oligarchical British Empire outlook to expunge the role of cognition, expunge the human spark out of society. And that's what we see going on. Now, again, I want to counterpose that to LaRouche's role with President Reagan and the Reagan administration on the Strategic Defense Initiative, as opposed to this kind of technical, mechanical, electrical processing of data in which Wiener and company were promoting. And of course, I'll mention a couple of developments that came out of that in a broader sense. But and of course, we have it today with the Internet of Things, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, so-called, and so on. This is an extension of that as well. But if you compare that kind of linear processing of data, compare that to the absolutely strategic thinking of Lyndon LaRouche in formulating the Strategic Defense Initiative policy, not only to make nuclear weapons obsolete, to develop the means by which both we and the Soviet Union could prevent the effective use of ICBM, but as well the spin-offs of such an SDI effort would be equivalent to the Kennedy moonshot program in terms of spin-offs into the entire U.S. economy. This was not about, quote unquote, saving energy, as Wiener would argue, that this processing of information utilizes, virtually no energy is expended. You're simply improving your data, you're improving your information, therefore something is gained with very little expenditure of energy. Therefore, you're avoiding entropy. LaRouche was promoting an initiative for the recovery of the United States economy and the entire world economy as a byproduct through advances, rapidly forced march, if you will, advances on the frontiers of science. And I think that's a very important aspect of this to keep in mind. So systems analysis, cost benefit analysis, these are standard today. In 1948, at the same time Wiener's book was being published, Robert McNamara, Secretary of Defense, was bringing in a fellow, Hitch was his name, was bringing him into the Department of Defense. And I'm trying to find Charles Hitch. Charles Hitch was the head of the Rand Corporation, which had been earlier spun off in 1948, had been spun off, excuse me, I'm getting my dates correct here. In 1948, Rand Corporation was spun off from the Defense Department as a nonprofit. And Hitch was the head of it. In 1961, Robert McNamara brought Hitch into the Department of Defense as the chief of cost and effectiveness of weapon systems. Systems analysis then became the basis of integrating strategic decisions, policy decisions, weapon systems, weapon procurement, and so on. But think for a second. Robert McNamara, if you remember, Robert Body Count McNamara. He thought that utilizing such methods, which he also applied, unfortunately, at Ford Motor Company, that such methods would allow us to project that the means by which we could win the war in Indochina. Utilizing the British developed policies of strategic bombardment, blanket bombardment, but most fundamentally, what do you look at in terms of the data set? You're looking at the number of dead bodies, the compilation of dead bodies, their number of their dead bodies versus the number of our dead bodies. This is linearization, if you will. This is systems analysis. Take cost benefit analysis. Can you show us what the benefit will be if we spend X amount of money over X number of years, what the actual outcome will be? That may seem like a very simple, practical question, pragmatic question to ask. But if you're dealing with physics, the frontiers of physics, of science, the same principle holds to classical musical composition in a different way. If you're thinking you're thinking outside the box, you cannot predict from the start of the piece where Beethoven is going to go with the Ninth Symphony. You can, over the course of comprehending the piece as a totality, understand it as an absolute unity of development, of if you will, manifold development. Likewise, in terms of the advancing economy of the United States, once Wall Street imposes policies of cost-benefit analysis and essentially forecloses on new fundamental breakthroughs in science and technology and says, no, we're not going there. that is not a reasonable investment. You're putting the body counters and so forth. You're putting them in charge. You're foreclosing on the future and future generations. And this is absolutely what the Rand Corporation brought into the Defense Department, and of course, since then it's spread throughout the whole U.S. economy. Now we have, of course, big tech. What are they interested in? They're interested in gathering data, lots of data. They've been doing that, right? Surreptitiously and otherwise. The National Security Agency, gathering data. I smile at this because, of course, the data isn't how the human mind works. They're not going to be able to predict what we decide conceptually, cognitively, is required and politically required. If we think about this in terms of the control of flows of information, this is marketing, or what used to be called marketing. You're attempting to determine not only who is interested in what, but you're also interested in shaping what they'll buy. You're turning producers or individuals that should be producers into consumers, right? Consumers not only of information, but much more that works against their actual interests, there and their families and their community's interests. Now computers can be very useful. LaRouche was an did early work, consulting work in computer use, the development of computers, the potential, partly because of the breakdown of the U.S. economy as it was developing in the 1960s. As I said, the foreclosing on the further development of the U.S. economy. The tide started going out. Steel mills were being shut down under Trumanism, and that continued. And then there was never really fundamentally a recovery of the U.S. economy. Under conditions, as Mr. LaRouche said, under those conditions, as he is an economic consultant at the time, working and related to industrial engineering and other areas, said, this means that if there is an increase in monies for capital formation, under these circumstances, that money is going to go into the administrative side of and services side of the economy. And therefore, there's going to be increasing usefulness for computers. He wasn't advocating this transition, this shift in the economy. This was a shift away from a productive economy, but he could recognize that computers could play a greater role because of the increasing administrative overhead in the overall U.S. economy. But there's also there's the potentials with 5G, the Internet of Things, in a very limited time and space framework. Modern electrical railroads have hundreds of sensors on them, or locomotive engines have hundreds and hundreds of sensors on them. GE set up the system where their locomotives, data from their locomotives, even in a place like Kazakhstan, would arrive via Wi-Fi, satellite, and so forth, would arrive at key data centers, a few key 2 or 3 data centers in the world. Those data centers would keep track of the condition of those locomotives, and those sensors regarding heat and other functions in terms of the engines, friction caused heat, and problems, electrical problems, and so forth, could order the pulling over of their locomotives before the local locomotive engineers noticed the plan even existed. So in terms of a feedback loop in terms of, again, a relative limited space and time, um, this kind of robotics in a factory, the coordination of robotics in a so-called assembly line, modern day assembly line, um, can utilize this kind of information flow to correct. And of course, now they're trying to develop machines that can more readily improve themselves. The data collected in the field on the functioning of machine tools and other pieces of equipment, including locomotive, where there's problems, that information can be fed back into those, into the production process itself to correct problems in the production process. Of course, that means that your production machinery has to have a built-in capability to adjust. But that is not cognition. That is a linearized improvement of existing technology in an existing domain created by human beings. And so, so this is a very important point to keep in mind in terms of the limitations of this. But I just want to conclude here tonight with a bit on referencing the supply chain crisis, so-called supply chain crisis, which we developed earlier, and I've made a presentation on that, and there's a paper available on the LaRouche PAC website as well. First of all, we can't handle a trade deficit of $1 trillion, which is what we're headed to this year. We're importing more from abroad than ever before. We're exporting 1.5 trillion, we're importing 2.5. That's what's coming through the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles, an incredible volume of goods coming into the country all at once, and it's clogging the arteries of the entire system. But it's more fundamental than that. Take what LaRouche calls the hardy entrepreneur. The hardy entrepreneur who may run a advanced machine shop, producing goods related to the aerospace sector or other advanced technology areas of the economy. That entrepreneur, he or she, has got to make decisions about the future. He's got to forecast and make decisions today based on a forecast, which is a bit like Gauss's determination of the asteroid orbits based on very limited number of observations, limited data. The entrepreneur has a limited set of data points from which to project the future and future investment for his company, even under the best of circumstances. Under conditions of lean manufacturing, quote unquote, just-in-time delivery. This is part of systems analysis, right? Well, we're not going to keep inventory anymore, but because we have computers, we have the internet, we have the interconnected system of logistics, of communications, and the physical logistics of moving goods. We're going to do away with inventory. That'll save us a lot of money. Just in time. That's what just in time is. Good. The suppliers are delivering just as they're required for the production process. Lean manufacturing. No surplus labor. Labor is only brought in and applied where and when achieves the maximum results. Just in time, I've referred to it as skin and bones manufacturing. You're working with the least possible capabilities and utilizing data to streamline the process. It's been pointed out, just an example of the systems analysis process. A hot dog factory will adjust the ingredients going into its hot dogs based on the movement of the prices of the ingredients in the market. Shifting to maintain the lowest possible price for a given product that they can put out onto the market. That's a very simple example, but you get the idea, I think. This is a lean manufacturing in an example of that. So under these circumstances, the entrepreneur, the producer, what's left of the producers in the United States, remember, lean manufacturing, just in time. Well, hey, it's cheaper to produce it over there in China or Vietnam or Malaysia or Mexico than it is here. These supply chains have been extended out, all of it, you know, as one extended chain, like a chain of dominoes. And any place in that chain, and with the massive influx of shipping into the United States post-COVID, there's now 90 ships sitting outside the Long Beach and Los Angeles harbor. 90 ships, the huge container ships that can't even get in. Under these conditions, then the whole thing just collapses like a set of dominoes. The suppliers can't supply; they're not delivered. You know, on your computer screen, your tower, whatever, you can see real time where your goods, where your supply chain items are, and so forth. But you can also see that they're not moving. So what do we have here? We have this massive discrepancy between a monetary process calculating on the basis of systems analysis, cost benefit analysis, that big data, what needs and can be done. But what was ignored was the underlying physical process of production that dropped through the floor. There isn't the railroad trackage in railroads. There aren't the chassis to move the containers out of the port areas. The ports are not big enough to handle the influx of containers. The intermodal shipping yards are then not able, they don't have the capacity to move the containers. What then happened as an additional element, and I'll just close with this. Well, then retailers, beginning to see this process developing months ago, doubled and tripled their orders to try to get in as much as possible to try to manage their own economic situation under these conditions of economic breakdown. As a consequence today, warehouses across the United States are at least 95% of capacity, including the latest building of new warehousing capacity, completely jammed with stuff. Who knows whether someone will ultimately buy it? But this is the warehousing of goods, but also it's the warehousing of goods that have not been delivered because of the breakdown of the logistical system. So I think this is, you know, really exemplary of the situation that we have now. And because of the time, well, let me just turn to a brief geometric example. If you could put up the next slide, Miwa. LaRouche developed, particularly beginning with this textbook, So You Wish to Know All About Economics, I believe published in 1984, thereabouts, 85. Begin to utilize even more the use of constructive geometry to educate organizers and citizens on how to think about the real economy. And I'm just doing this briefly here. Rather than starting with linearity, rather than starting from the standpoint of a Newtonian empty space filled with hard particles, the kind of notion of statistical gas theory, you know, which leads to the concept of entropy that we were discussing earlier. start instead with primary action. Start with circular action, not the circle, but start with circular action. And in this case, you see at the top of the diagram, you see the creation of a cycloid. That is the motion of a circle of circular action as it rolls, in this case, along a plane. It could also roll along an orbit. An interesting way of thinking about the orbit of the Earth around the sun, for example. And what is created, you see it there in the blue, is a specific shape, the cycloid. And this led to the development of by Huygens of his pendulum clock, utilizing the cycloid, not Galileo's simple what shall we say, the term, it's a simple swinging back and forth of a weighted string, but one in which it wraps around the cycloid. But go on to the next one. We'll come back to that if necessary. I don't think we'll need to. Here's a photograph of, if you rotate the cycloid over, here's the cycloidal curve, shall we say inverted or rotated. And you see alongside it a straight line, a straight course of action. Now the question was the brachistochrone problem. What is the shortest distance between 2 points? From the standpoint of linearity, Newtonian physics and whatnot, the shortest distance between the point at the top on your top left to the bottom, the shortest distance is the shortest time. But indeed, what had been discovered by Huygens, Leibniz, and the Bernoullis, Johann Bernoulli and his brother, and they developed this as a point of physics, a physical principle, was the cycloidal curve. That curve is the fastest distance between the top and the bottom of that curve. It's also isochronic, but we'll leave that for another day. Now think about it. So what it seems to be, what is the shortest distance is not the shortest time. This was the discovery of a new or the elaboration of a new physical principle, starting of transcendentals, that had started with the development of circular action and Nicholas of Cuz's insight into that process. But this is where what seems to be the case in the visible domain is not the reality, the physical reality of universal action, of least action pathways. And least action pathways in the universe are the means by which the universe, but it's also the means by which our minds develop new concepts, new breakthroughs, and the means by which we make Promethean changes, transformations in the society around us. So let me close there and open up for discussion.